The old archive room was pitch black. A rusty steam pipe hissed in the corner. A rat scurried past her stiletto heel. The feeble light from her dying phone barely illuminated the tarnished brass plaque that read Harrington Systems, Pioneer of American Software, 1982. Her salt and pepper hair clung to her face. Her breath quickened, and silent tears soaked the cuff of her designer blouse. She wasn't just trapped. She was planning to end everything until she heard footsteps. Heavy, steady, and they stopped right outside the steel door from the Cold War era. Before we dive into this story about courage, betrayal, and second chances in a changing America, take a moment to comment where you are watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. The old maintenance elevator groaned as it descended one floor too many, stopping with a metallic shudder instead of the smooth digital precision Eleanor Harrington had demanded during the building's last renovation. The sudden jolt caused her to stumble against the wall, her Louboutin heel twisting awkwardly beneath her. "Damn it," she whispered, her voice echoing in the empty metal box. Her hand instinctively reached for the emergency call button, then stopped. No one would be there to answer. The maintenance staff had left hours ago. Her executive assistant had departed at 6:13 p.m. precisely with that look of thinly veiled relief that Eleanor had grown accustomed to seeing. The board members had filed out of the conference room at 5:47 p.m., avoiding her gaze, their decisions still hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. Only James remained behind, his hand on her shoulder, a practiced look of concern on his face. "Ellie, it's just business. You know that." 40 years of friendship compressed into those hollow words. "Take the weekend, clear your head. We'll find you a position on the advisory board. Your legacy will be respected." Legacy, as if she were already dead. The basement level of Harrington Systems was a different world from the gleaming glass and polished steel of the upper floors. Here, beneath the veneer of technological progress, the building revealed its true age. These foundations had been laid in 1943 when the structure had housed a military communications facility. The walls were thick concrete designed to withstand bombings that never came to Boston shores. Eleanor's father had shown her the original blueprints when she was a girl, his calloused fingers tracing the outlines with pride. American engineering, he'd said, built to last. Unlike American loyalty, it seemed. Eleanor's phone screen illuminated as she checked the time, 9:32 p.m. The soft blue glow revealed a corridor that hadn't seen a thorough cleaning in decades. The regular maintenance staff only ventured down here for essential repairs. The company's digital archives had long since replaced the need for physical document storage. Or so everyone believed. She moved forward, her footsteps echoing against concrete. The dim emergency lights cast long shadows, creating ghosts out of filing cabinets and forgotten office furniture. Her destination lay at the end of the northeast corridor, a section marked Storage Unit 7 on the building plans but labeled Archives in her father's old notes. The weight of the pill bottle in her purse hung heavy against her hip. She'd filled the prescription 3 months ago after the first whispers of Global Tech's interest in acquisition reached her. Just a precaution, she'd told herself. An exit strategy. She never thought she'd actually consider using it. But that was before today's board meeting. Before she'd watched James, her CFO, her confidant, the godfather to her son, present the financial projections that painted her leadership as obsolete. Before Margaret Chen had unveiled her modernization strategy that would effectively erase 40 years of Harrington's unique approach to software development. Before she'd realized that the company vote was a mere formality, the decision had already been made in golf courses and private dining rooms where she hadn't been invited. Eleanor reached the end of the corridor and faced a nondescript metal door with a simple keypad lock. She entered the 6-digit code 070482, the date she'd founded the company, and heard the satisfying click of the mechanism releasing. The door swung open with surprising ease, revealing not the small storage room indicated on the building plans, but a much larger space. Her father's secret. The true archives of Harrington Systems. When Thomas Harrington had worked on the Apollo program, he developed a near-paranoid habit of documenting everything. This meticulous record-keeping had transferred to his daughter's company, resulting in a physical archive that chronicled not just Harrington's history, but pivotal moments in American computing history. Contracts, schematics, correspondence, prototype designs, the authentic story of an industry that had transformed the nation. Eleanor stepped inside her hand, finding the light switch by memory. Nothing happened. The power had been disconnected, another quiet move in the corporate chess game being played without her knowledge. She illuminated her phone's flashlight instead, sweeping the beam across shelves lined with storage boxes, filing cabinets with fading labels, and glass display cases containing the company's earliest hardware. In the center of the room stood a large oak table, her father's drafting table repurposed as a workspace. Here in this hidden chamber, Eleanor had made many of the decisions that shaped Harrington's systems away from boardrooms and consultants connected to the company's roots. She moved to the far wall where a row of 5 preservation cases contained the company's most valuable historical documents. The beam of her phone light revealed the plaque beside the first case, Eagle Project, classified 1987-1992. Her fingers traced the edge of the case, remembering. Project Eagle had been Harrington's breakthrough, an encryption system developed initially for military communications, later adapted for early internet banking. It had put the company on the map, secured their first government contracts, and established Harrington as a pioneer in data security. The technology had evolved, but the core principles still underpinned much of their security infrastructure today. Or at least they had until Margaret Chen had declared it legacy architecture in need of comprehensive modernization during today's presentation. The second case contained the original handwritten business plan, scrawled on yellow legal pads in her father's cramped engineering script and her own more fluid notation. The third held the company's first major commercial contract. The fourth, patents and awards accumulated over 4 decades of innovation. The fifth case was empty. It had been reserved for what Thomas Harrington had called the crown jewels, the ultimate innovation that would secure the company's place in history. Eleanor had never found her father's mysterious final project after his death, though rumors persisted among the old-timers that he had developed something revolutionary just before his heart attack in 1995. She placed her phone on the table, the light casting upward to create eerie shadows across the ceiling. Then she reached into her purse and removed the pill bottle, setting it beside the phone with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence. 40 years, she whispered to the empty room. 40 years of my life. The building plans she'd memorized never showed a second door to this room, yet as she ran her hands along the back wall, her fingers found a slight depression in the concrete. A seam. Curious despite her despair, Eleanor pressed against it. A section of wall swung inward with the heavy resistance of long disuse, revealing another chamber beyond, smaller, with a single metal desk and what appeared to be ancient computer equipment covered in dust cloths. The secret room within the secret room. Her father's private workspace. Eleanor stepped through the doorway, her heart suddenly racing with unexpected discovery. The room smelled of dust and old paper, but also faintly of her father's pipe tobacco, preserved somehow in this sealed chamber. She pulled away one of the cloths, revealing an IBM computer that hadn't been state-of-the-art since the Reagan administration. "What were you working on, Dad?" she murmured, running her fingers over the keyboard. The sound of the outer door closing made her freeze. Then came the distinctive click of the lock engaging. Eleanor spun around, rushing back to the hidden doorway, but the mechanism had engaged automatically. She was sealed inside the innermost chamber, her phone, and ironically, the pill bottle left on the table in the outer room. She pushed against the wall section, but whatever release mechanism existed was not evident from this side. "No, no, no," she pounded against the concrete, panic rising in her throat. "Hello, is anyone there?" The silence that answered was absolute. The basement was deserted at this hour. No one knew she was here. No one would look for her until Monday at the earliest, and by then the board vote would be complete. Global Tech would begin their takeover. Everything her father had built, everything she had dedicated her life to, would be dismantled, repackaged, and absorbed into the corporate behemoth that was systematically swallowing America's tech heritage. In the darkness of the sealed room, Eleanor Harrington, the queen of software, who had once graced the cover of Fortune magazine, sank to the floor and wept for the first time since her father's funeral. The tears came silently at first, then in racking sobs that echoed off concrete walls that had stood since World War II. She didn't know how long she sat there, curled against the wall, her designer suit collecting dust from a floor that hadn't been swept in decades. The darkness was nearly complete, save for a thin line of light seeping beneath the hidden door, the glow of her abandoned phone slowly dimming as its battery drained. Then she heard footsteps. heavy measured approaching down the corridor outside the archive room. Eleanor scrambled to her feet, moving to the hidden doorway. "Hello," she called, her voice hoarse. "Is someone there? I'm trapped in here." The footsteps paused. Then came a knock on the outer door. "Hello, anyone in there?" A man's voice, deep with the slight roughness of age. "Yes, I'm locked in. Please, can you open the door?" A pause. "Ma'am, this door needs a code. Do you know it?" 070482, Eleanor called, pressing her ear against the concrete. July 4th, 1982. She heard the beeps of the keypad, then the click of the lock releasing. Light flooded the outer archive room as the door swung open. "Hello," the man called. "I'm in here. There's a hidden room. I'm trapped inside." More footsteps, then silence. "I can see the seam," the man said finally, his voice closer now. "But I don't see how to open it. Is there a switch or something?" "There must be. I pressed somewhere on this wall and it opened, but I can't find the mechanism from this side." "Hang on. Let me check the outer wall." Eleanor heard him moving around the archive room, then a low whistle of appreciation. "Quite a collection you've got out here, ma'am. Please just find the switch. I've been trapped for hours." "Sorry, right?" More sounds of movement. "You said you pressed on the wall. Maybe it's a pressure plate or, There was a soft click, and the hidden door swung outward, revealing a man in a gray maintenance uniform holding a flashlight. He was tall, with broad shoulders, slightly stooped with age, his face weathered but handsome in a rugged way. Silver hair cut in a military short style, deep blue eyes that registered surprise and recognition. "Ms. Harrington." Eleanor stepped through the doorway, her legs unsteady after hours on the concrete floor. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Miller, Frank Miller, building maintenance." He offered his hand, then seemed to think better of it, noticing the grime on his work gloves. He removed them and extended his hand again. "Sorry about that. Wasn't expecting to find the CEO in a hidden room on a Friday night." His handshake was firm, his palm calloused. A working man's hand. She noticed a faded tattoo on his forearm, beneath his rolled-up sleeve, military insignia of some kind. "Not many people know about this room, Mr. Miller," Eleanor said, trying to regain her composure, brushing dust from her skirt in a futile gesture. "I imagine not. Not on any building plans I've ever seen." His eyes moved past her to the inner chamber, curiosity evident, but he made no comment. Instead, he glanced at the table where her phone and the pill bottle sat, illuminated in the beam of his heavy-duty flashlight. There was a moment of uncomfortable recognition in his eyes. He understood immediately what the pills were for. But he simply reached for her phone. "Battery's almost dead," he said, handing it to her. "Got a charger in my office upstairs if you need it." Eleanor took the phone, slipping it into her pocket, then quickly retrieved the pill bottle, avoiding his gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. How did you know someone was down here?" "Doing my regular rounds. Thought I heard something." He gestured toward the door. "Power's out in this section. Been meaning to check the breaker, but it's not a priority area, according to management." The way he said management carried a weight of unspoken commentary. "Well, I appreciate your thoroughness," Eleanor said, moving toward the exit. "I should be going." Frank Miller didn't move from the doorway. "Ma'am, forgive me for asking, but are you all right?" The unexpected concern in his voice nearly broke through Eleanor's hastily reconstructed composure. "I'm fine. Just got accidentally locked in while retrieving some old documents." He nodded slowly, clearly not believing her, but respectful enough not to challenge the obvious lie. "It's past 10, Ms. Harrington. Building's empty except for security up front. Can I walk you out?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "That would be helpful. Thank you." They walked in silence through the dim corridor, the beam of Frank's flashlight illuminating the way. The maintenance elevator was still stuck at the basement level, its doors open like a gaping mouth in the darkness. "This thing's been acting up for months," Frank commented, shining his light into the elevator shaft. "Keep telling them it needs a complete overhaul, not just patches." "Them?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious, despite her emotional exhaustion. "Facilities management. New company that took over the contract last year. Cut corners everywhere they can. Typical corporate efficiency experts." He said the last words with quiet disdain. "We'll take the service stairs, more reliable." He led her to an unmarked door that opened onto a concrete stairwell. As they began to climb, Eleanor noticed Frank favoring his right leg slightly. "You're limping," she observed. "Old injury. Acts up sometimes, especially when the weather's changing." He didn't elaborate further, and Eleanor didn't press. They reached the ground floor, emerging into the polished marble lobby that stood in stark contrast to the utilitarian basement. The night security guard looked up from his desk, surprise registering on his face at the sight of the CEO emerging from the service entrance with the maintenance man. "Evening, Ms. Harrington. Everything okay?" the guard asked. "Yes, John. Mr. Miller was just helping me retrieve some archived materials." She turned to Frank. "Thank you again." Frank nodded, his expression unreadable in the lobby's dim night lighting. "Ma'am," he said simply, then turned to leave. Something made Eleanor call after him. "Mr. Miller," he paused, looking back. "How long have you worked here at Harrington?" A slight smile creased his weathered face. "Coming up on 15 years now." 15 years, she repeated. "And we've never met." "No reason we would have, ma'am. I work nights mostly." "Keep the place running while everyone else goes home." There was no bitterness in his voice, just simple fact. Eleanor felt a sudden, irrational desire to continue the conversation, to delay her return to the empty penthouse apartment where the weight of the day's betrayal waited to crush her again. "Do you have time for a coffee, Mr. Miller? I'd like to hear more about the building maintenance issues. As CEO, I should be aware of these things." Surprise flickered across his face, followed by cautious assessment. His eyes glanced briefly toward her purse, where the pill bottle now rested. "There's a diner around the corner still open. Better coffee than the break room stuff." 20 minutes later, they sat in a vinyl booth at Rosie's All-Night Diner, a throwback establishment that had somehow survived the gentrification of downtown Boston. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with a name tag reading Dottie, had greeted Frank by name and brought him the usual without asking, black coffee and a slice of apple pie. "Come here often?" Eleanor asked, warming her hands around a ceramic mug of surprisingly good coffee. "Few nights a week on my dinner break," Frank replied. "Been coming here since before it was retro to do so." He nodded toward the waitress. "Dottie's husband was in my unit during Desert Storm." "Good man." "You served in the Gulf War," Frank nodded. "Army, 82nd Airborne. Long time ago now." Eleanor studied him with new interest. "And before Harrington, what did you do?" A shadow passed over his face. "Worked in tech, actually. Software engineer at IBM in the 80s, then some smaller firms. Was at Microplex Systems until 2008. Microplex. They went under during the financial crisis, didn't they? Along with my pension and 30 years of specialized expertise." He took a sip of coffee. "But you didn't ask me to coffee to hear an old man's career complaints, Ms. Harrington." "Eleanor, please." "Eleanor." He said her name carefully as if testing it. "Frank." She nodded, then looked out the window at the dark street lit by the occasional passing car. "The board is selling Harrington Systems to Global Tech. The vote is Monday, but it's already decided." Frank's expression remained neutral. "Been rumors about that for months in the maintenance department. Sorry to hear it's happening." 40 years of independence ended in a 3-hour meeting. Eleanor's voice was hollow. "My father founded Harrington in our garage. Did you know that classic American success story? MIT engineer decides he can build better systems than anyone else, mortgages his house, works 18-hour days. I was 15 when he started the company. I'd do my homework on one end of the workbench while he soldered circuit boards on the other." Frank nodded. "Different time, when things were still made here. We never took the company public. That was deliberate. My father believed that answering to shareholders would force the kind of a short-term thinking that kills innovation." She laughed bitterly. "Instead, we have a board full of family, friends, and industry experts who just voted to sell everything to a conglomerate that will strip mine our technology and discard the shell." "Technology changes," Frank said carefully. "Companies come and go. Been happening since the Industrial Revolution. Is that supposed to be comforting?" "Just history." He cut a piece of pie with his fork. "Though some parts of history shouldn't be forgotten so quickly." Something in his tone caught Eleanor's attention. "You said you worked at IBM in the 80s, doing what?" "Systems programming, low-level stuff mostly. Worked on the team that developed parts of DOS." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You worked on DOS, the operating system?" Frank nodded, a ghost of pride crossing his features. "Small part of a big team. But yes, that's the foundation of modern computing. You helped build that. Like I said, small part. History doesn't remember most of the builders, just the architects. He took another bite of pie. But I didn't mind. It was good work, important work. Eleanor was silent for a moment, reassessing the man across from her. Not just a maintenance worker, but a software pioneer who had helped create the technological landscape she had built her company within. A man who had fallen from the cutting edge of innovation to fixing elevators and checking circuit breakers. What happened, she asked finally, between IBM and now? Frank's face closed slightly. Life happened, Harrington, Eleanor. The industry changed, got younger faster, then came outsourcing, downsizing. 2008 finished what was left of my career path. He shrugged. Got a daughter to support. Maintenance work is steady. No shame in it. No, of course not. I didn't mean to imply, no offense taken. He finished his coffee. But since we're asking personal questions, mind if I ask one? Eleanor tensed slightly, then nodded. That room downstairs, the hidden one. What's in there that's worth? He paused, choosing his words carefully. Worth coming back to after hours. Eleanor studied his face, searching for judgment or pity, but found only genuine curiosity. History, she said finally. My father's legacy. The real story of Harrington Systems, not the sanitized version that will appear in Global Tech's press release next week. And what will you do now? After the sale, the question hung in the air between them. Eleanor glanced down at her purse where the pill bottle waited. Frank followed her gaze, then looked back at her face, his blue eyes steady. There's always another chapter, Eleanor. Always. Easy to say. Didn't say it was easy, said it was true. He placed his fork down. My wife died in 2016. Cancer. Left me with an 8-year-old daughter and a mountain of medical debt on top of a foreclosure notice. Thought about ending things myself. The simple admission delivered without drama or self-pity caught Eleanor off guard. What stopped you? Sarah, my daughter. A smile softened his weathered face. Couldn't leave her alone in this world. So I found another way. Always another way. Eleanor looked away, uncomfortable with the transparent understanding between them. This stranger, this maintenance man, who had once helped build computing history, had seen through her in a way that friends of 40 years had not. Or perhaps had seen but chosen to ignore. I should go, she said, reaching for her purse. Frank nodded, signaling for the check. I'll walk you to your car. That's not necessary. Humor and old soldiers' habits, ma'am. My mother raised me to see ladies safely to their transportation. Outside, the April night was unseasonably cool. A brisk wind channeling between the downtown buildings. Eleanor's Tesla waited in its reserved spot behind the building, gleaming black under the security lights. Nice car, Frank commented. It's just a car. Eleanor unlocked it with her phone. Thank you for the coffee, Frank, and for finding me earlier. He nodded, his expression serious. You going to be okay tonight? The question was direct, his meaning clear. Are you going to use those pills? I'll be fine, she answered, not entirely sure if it was the truth. If you don't mind some unsolicited advice, Frank said, sleep on any big decisions. World looks different in the morning light. Always has. Eleanor nodded, then impulsively reached into her purse and extracted a business card, offering it to him. If you ever need anything, Frank, a reference or help with your daughter's education, anything. He took the card, studying it for a moment before tucking it into his shirt pocket. Appreciate that, though I suspect you might have bigger concerns come Monday. Yes, well, Eleanor opened her car door. Good night, Mr. Miller. Ma'am. He stepped back, watching as she slid into the driver's seat. Just before she closed the door, he spoke again. That hidden room, I'm guessing not many people know about it. No, just me, as far as I know. My father built it secretly during renovations in the 90s. Frank nodded thoughtfully. Might be worth another look before the new owners take over. Old secrets have a way of becoming valuable when the landscape changes. With that cryptic comment, he gave her a respectful nod and turned, walking back toward the service entrance of Harrington Systems, his slight limp barely noticeable in his measured stride. Eleanor watched him disappear into the building before starting her car. The digital dashboard illuminated with Harrington's proprietary interface, one of the company's smaller innovations licensed to luxury automakers, soon to be rebranded as Global Tech Technology, no doubt. As she drove through the nearly empty downtown streets toward her Beacon Hill apartment, Eleanor found herself thinking not about the board's betrayal or Monday's looming finality, but about Frank Miller, a man who had helped build the foundations of modern computing, now walking the midnight corridors of someone else's technological empire. A man who had faced his own abyss and chosen to step back from the edge. For the first time since the board meeting, Eleanor felt something other than despair. Not hope exactly, but curiosity. What had her father hidden in that inner chamber? What secrets might still lie dormant in Harrington's forgotten archives? She had intended this weekend to be her last. A time to put affairs in order to craft the perfect resignation letter, to empty the pill bottle, and exit with the dignity that the board had tried to deny her. Now she found herself considering a different possibility. Frank's words echoed in her mind. Always another chapter. By the time she reached her apartment, the pill bottle no longer seemed like the only option. There was something else to do first. A mystery to solve. A legacy to uncover. Monday's corporate execution might still be inevitable, but Eleanor Harrington was no longer ready to go quietly into oblivion. Not until she had examined every possibility uncovered, every secret explored, every hidden room in the house her father had built. As she stepped into her empty apartment, the weight of solitude settled around her shoulders like a familiar cloak. The sleek, minimalist furnishings chosen by an interior designer to project success and sophistication suddenly seemed sterile and impersonal. Had she ever really lived here, or merely existed between board meetings and international flights? Eleanor moved to the floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. The city lights reflected on the dark water, a constellation of human ambition and perseverance. Somewhere out there, Frank Miller was returning to whatever modest home housed himself and his daughter, a man who had helped build the modern world now invisible to it. How many others like him were there, pioneers erased from the official narratives, their contributions forgotten, while figureheads claimed the glory? How much of Harrington's success had been built on unacknowledged brilliance? Eleanor removed the pill bottle from her purse and carried it to the bathroom, where she emptied its contents into the toilet and flushed. The soft whirlpool carried away what had just hours ago seemed like her only escape. Always another chapter, she whispered to her reflection. The face that stared back was tired, the carefully maintained facade of corporate confidence stripped away to reveal the vulnerability beneath. But in her eyes, a familiar determination began to rekindle the same look her father had worn when facing seemingly insurmountable technical challenges. Eleanor Harrington had 3 days before Global Tech took ownership of her life's work. 3 days to discover what her father had hidden in that secret room. 3 days to find a way to preserve what mattered most. She reached for her phone and set an alarm for 500 a.m. There would be time for rest later. Now she had history to uncover and perhaps a future to reclaim. Frank Miller turned his key in the lock of the modest 2-bedroom apartment in Dorchester. The neighborhood had seen better days, but it was affordable and the building was secure. He'd moved here after selling the house in the suburbs, unable to maintain the mortgage payments on a maintenance worker's salary. The apartment was dark except for the blue glow of a computer monitor in the corner of the living room. Sarah was still awake, the soft clicking of her keyboard, a familiar sound that brought a smile to Frank's weathered face. "Past your bedtime, kiddo," he said, closing the door behind him. Sarah Miller turned in her chair, her features illuminated by the screen's glow. At 8 years old, she had her mother's delicate features, but Frank's intense blue eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore flannel pajamas decorated with dinosaurs, a passion that had survived even as her interests expanded into more technical realms. "Dad, you won't believe what I found." Her excitement was palpable. "I was practicing with that old programming language you showed me, and I found this weird pattern in the code. It's like a signature or something." Frank set down his lunch cooler and moved to look over her shoulder. On the screen was a set of code that he recognized immediately, a section of the DOS operating system that he had helped develop decades ago. Sarah had been working through his old programming textbooks, soaking up knowledge with a speed that sometimes frightened him. "Where did you get this?" he asked, scanning the familiar lines. "From that archive site you bookmarked. They have all the old software code. Look at this section here." She pointed to a segment that indeed contained a pattern not random, but deliberately inserted. A signature hidden in plain sight. Frank stared at it, memories flooding back from a time when he'd been on the cutting edge of technological revolution. His fingers had written those lines, embedded that pattern. A small act of defiance against corporate anonymity, a way of saying I was here that no one had noticed. Until now, until his daughter had found it with her extraordinary mind. That's, that's actually mine, he said softly. I wrote that. Sarah's eyes widened. You put a secret signature in DOS, Dad, that's in like every computer from the 80s. Not every line, and he corrected with a small smile. Just this subsystem, just this small corner of history. That's so cool. She looked at him with newfound appreciation, and Frank felt a familiar ache in his chest, pride mingled with regret for the career that could have been, for the recognition his work had never received. It was a different time, Sarah. We built things to last back then. Wasn't about getting rich quick or making flashy apps. We were laying down the foundation of a new world. He ruffled her hair. But it's way past your bedtime, young lady. School tomorrow. Sarah saved her work and reluctantly shut down the computer. Did anything interesting happen at work tonight? She asked, following the nightly ritual of their conversations. Frank hesitated, thinking of Eleanor Harrington, the hidden room, the pill bottle. Actually, yeah. Met someone at the interesting, the CEO, believe it or not. The CEO, what was she doing there so late? Working late, I guess. Frank kept his explanation vague, respecting Eleanor's privacy. Turns out she's been running Harrington Systems since the beginning, since before you were born. Is she nice? Sarah asked, climbing into her bed as Frank sat on the edge. Seems so. Sad, though. I think the company's being sold and she's not happy about it. Sarah considered this, her young face serious. Like when Mr. Peterson's hardware store got bought by that big chain and they fired everyone. Something like that. Frank pulled the covers up to her chin. Corporate America, always changing, not always for the better. You should help her, Sarah said with the simple conviction of childhood. You're good at fixing things. Frank smiled at his daughter's faith in him. Some things can't be fixed with a wrench and some electrical tape, kiddo. But I appreciate the vote of confidence. He kissed her forehead. Sleep tight. Love you. Love you too, Dad. As Frank turned out the light and closed Sarah's door, he found himself thinking about Eleanor Harrington and the hidden room beneath Harrington Systems. There had been something in her eyes when she spoke about her father's legacy, a passion that resonated with his own buried ambitions. In his bedroom, Frank opened the drawer of his nightstand and removed an old leather portfolio. Inside was a collection of papers, designs, algorithms, concepts he'd developed over decades in the industry, but had never had the opportunity to implement. Ideas that might have changed things had he not been sidelined by corporate politics and economic downturns. Among them was a sketch of an encryption algorithm he'd designed in the mid-90s, a system that would have revolutionized data security had anyone been willing to listen to a middle-aged programmer being pushed out of an industry obsessed with youth. Frank looked at Eleanor's business card, which he'd placed on the nightstand. The CEO of Harrington Systems, a woman fighting to preserve her father's legacy against corporate erasure. Perhaps she would understand the value of what he had created. Perhaps even at this late stage, there might be a way to ensure his work wasn't completely forgotten. Or perhaps it was just the foolish dream of an old man clinging to past glory. Frank returned the portfolio to the drawer and prepared for bed. Tomorrow was Saturday, his day with Sarah. They would visit the Science Museum, have lunch at their favorite diner, live in the present, rather than dwelling on paths not taken. But as he drifted towards sleep, his mind returned to the hidden room beneath Harrington Systems and the secrets it might contain. Secrets that, like his own hidden signature in the code, were waiting for the right person to discover them. Saturday morning arrived with the soft persistence of early spring sunshine filtering through Eleanor's bedroom windows. For a moment in the gentle haze between sleep and wakefulness, she forgot the corporate execution awaiting her on Monday. Then reality crashed back, the weight of it pressing against her chest like a physical force. But something was different this morning. The despair that had driven her to the basement archives with a bottle of pills had transformed overnight into a smoldering determination. She reached for her phone, 5:58 a.m. Her alarm hadn't even sounded yet. By 7:30, Eleanor had showered, dressed in casual clothes that would have shocked her executive team jeans, a simple blouse and comfortable shoes, and was pulling into the parking garage beneath Harrington Systems. Weekend security was minimal. The young guard at the desk barely glanced at her ID badge before waving her through with a respectful, "Morning, Miss Harrington." The building felt different on a Saturday, hollow, expectant, like a theater between performances. Her footsteps echoed in the marble lobby as she bypassed the executive elevator and headed for the service stairs Frank had shown her the night before. The maintenance elevator was still out of commission, its doors now sealed with yellow caution tape. Eleanor descended to the basement level, moving with purpose through the dim corridors. At the archive room door, she paused, entering the familiar code 070482, and felt a surge of relief when the lock disengaged with a satisfying click. The room was exactly as she had left it the night before, her phone's flashlight still sitting on the oak table where Frank had found it. The hidden door to the inner chamber stood partially open, revealing the darkness beyond. Eleanor had come prepared this time, bringing a powerful lantern from her emergency kit and a portable phone charger. She illuminated the inner chamber, revealing what she had only glimpsed the night before: her father's secret workspace preserved like a time capsule from the mid-1990s. The IBM computer was actually more advanced than she had initially thought, a prototype system that had never been mass-produced. Beside it sat stacks of notebooks filled with Thomas Harrington's distinctive handwriting, technical diagrams, and pages of complex mathematics. On the wall hung a framed photograph of the original Harrington Systems team from 1982, 5 people standing in front of a garage, her father in the center, Eleanor herself as a teenager off to one side, looking both awkward and proud. She began a systematic exploration, carefully examining each notebook, each folder, each piece of technology. Hours passed as she lost herself in her father's private thoughts and innovations. Some concepts she recognized as the foundations for technologies Harrington had eventually brought to market. Others seemed to be experimental dead ends, but nothing that explained why he had maintained this secret room, nothing that could be considered the crown jewels he had hinted at before his death. Until she opened the bottom drawer of the metal desk. Inside was a single red folder marked with a simple eagle silhouette, the symbol of Project Eagle. Eleanor's heart quickened as she lifted it out, feeling the unexpected weight of its contents. Inside was not the technical documentation she had expected, but a series of letters and handwritten notes exchanged between her father and someone identified only as FM. The correspondence detailed refinements to the Eagle project's encryption algorithm, brilliant insights that had transformed the project from merely excellent to revolutionary. The handwriting of this mysterious FM was precise, methodical, the work of an engineer's mind. The final letter, dated just 2 weeks before her father's fatal heart attack, mentioned a complete overhaul of the core sequencing that will make Eagle impenetrable for decades to come. Eleanor stared at the initials, a suspicion forming. FM Frank Miller. It seemed impossible, and yet a noise from the outer archive room made her freeze. Footsteps, then a familiar voice. "Miss Harrington, yo in here." Eleanor emerged from the hidden chamber to find Frank Miller standing in the doorway, still dressed in his maintenance uniform despite it being a Saturday. He didn't seem surprised to find her there. "Security call," he explained. "Said you'd come in early. Thought I'd check if you needed anything." His eyes moved to the red folder in her hand, then quickly back to her face. Eleanor held up the folder. "FM, that's you, isn't it? You worked with my father on Project Eagle." Frank's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, its recognition, perhaps regret. "Been a long time since I've seen that folder." "You knew about this room all along," Eleanor said, the realization dawning. "That's why you asked me about it last night. You've been here before." Frank nodded slowly. "Your father and I worked together occasionally, off the books. He had ideas that the board wouldn't approve, approaches that were too experimental for corporate comfort. This was our workspace. Why didn't you tell me this last night? Would you have believed a maintenance miss claiming to be your father's secret collaborator?" Frank shrugged. "Besides, those days are long gone. Ancient history." Eleanor opened the folder, extracting a page of handwritten calculations. "This encryption algorithm, you helped design it. Portions of it. Your father was the visionary. I just helped with some of the mathematical heavy lifting and implementation details." Frank stepped further into the room, his posture relaxing slightly as memories returned. We called it Eagle because your father said it would soar above anything else in the market. He was right. But your name never appeared on any of the patents, any of the documentation. Frank's smile held no bitterness, only a weary acceptance. That was the arrangement. I was still at Microplex then, bound by non-compete clauses. Your father paid me privately as a consultant. We both knew my career wouldn't survive if Microplex found out I was moonlighting for a competitor. Eleanor studied the man before her with new eyes. Not just a maintenance worker who had once been a programmer, but a genuine pioneer who had helped create Harrington's most successful security platform, the foundation upon which much of their current technology was built. Frank, this algorithm is still in use today. Modified, updated, but the core principles remain. Your work has been protecting data for decades. He nodded, a hint of pride breaking through his careful composure. Good to know it stood the test of time. And now Global Tech is going to buy it, rebrand it, and probably dismantle it to integrate into their own systems. Eleanor's voice hardened. They'll erase every trace of where it came from, who built it. That's business, Frank said, though his eyes reflected her anger. Progress marches on, old innovations get absorbed or discarded. No, Eleanor said firmly, that's not progress. That's corporate consolidation masquerading as innovation. They're not improving on our work, they're acquiring it, strip mining it, and discarding the shell. She placed the folder on the oak table and began pacing the archive room, her mind racing. There has to be more. My father talked about crown jewels in his final months, something revolutionary he was working on. Something in this room. Frank hesitated, then moved to the hidden chamber. May I? Eleanor nodded, following him into the smaller room. Frank went directly to the ancient IBM computer, running his hand almost reverently over its dusty case. Thomas was working on something big before he died, he confirmed. An evolution of the Eagle algorithm, but applied to a completely different domain. He called it Phoenix. Phoenix, Eleanor repeated, rising from the ashes of Eagle. Something like that, but it was theoretical, incomplete. He died before we could implement it fully. Frank's eyes scanned the room with the focused intensity of someone searching for a specific memory. He kept the core concepts separate from everything else, paranoid about corporate espionage even within his own company. Where? Eleanor asked, a new urgency in her voice. If it's in this room, we need to find it. Frank moved to the framed photograph on the wall, the original Harrington team standing in front of the garage. He carefully removed it from the wall, turning it over to examine the back. With practiced fingers, he pried open the frame, revealing a small USB drive taped to the inside of the backing. Your father was old school about security, Frank said, offering her the drive. Physical separation from network systems. Can't hack what you can't access. Eleanor took the drive, turning it over in her palm, so small to potentially contain something so valuable. Will this even work with modern systems? It's just storage. The interface is outdated, but the data should be intact. Frank glanced at his watch. My shift technically started 20 minutes ago. I should make some rounds, keep up appearances. Eleanor nodded, slipping the drive into her pocket. Frank, I need to understand what's on this drive. If it's what my father considered his greatest work, it might be nothing, Frank cautioned. Just theoretical concepts, incomplete algorithms. Or it might be exactly what I need to fight Global Tech's takeover. Eleanor met his gaze directly. Would you help me? You understood my father's work better than anyone. Frank's weathered face revealed his internal conflict. Ms. Harrington. Eleanor, please. Eleanor, I'm a maintenance worker now, have been for 15 years. That other life, that other version of Frank Miller, he doesn't exist anymore. I don't believe that, Eleanor said quietly. The man who helped create DOS, who refined the Eagle encryption algorithm, he's still here. I can see him right now looking at my father's old computer, like a musician reuniting with a beloved instrument. Frank said nothing, but his expression softened. I know it's a lot to ask, Eleanor continued, but I have less than 48 hours before Global Tech erases 40 years of Harrington innovation. Before they erase my father's legacy, before they erase your contributions too. Even if I wanted to help, I have responsibilities. My daughter. Bring her, Eleanor said impulsively. There's plenty of room in my apartment. She can watch TV, play video games, whatever kids do these days. A small smile tugged at Frank's lips. Sarah's not exactly your typical 8-year-old. She doesn't watch much TV. He paused, considering. But she has been asking to visit the Boston Science Museum. It's just a few blocks from here. Perfect. You take her to the museum this morning, and afterward you both come to my place. We'll order in lunch and see what Phoenix is all about. Eleanor felt a surge of hope for the first time since the board meeting. Please, Frank, I can't do this alone. Frank Miller stood silent for a long moment, the past and present visibly wrestling within him. Finally, he reached into his pocket and produced a worn business card, the one Eleanor had given him the night before. He turned it over, wrote a phone number on the back, and handed it to her. My cell, text me your address. We'll come by around 1. He moved toward the door, then paused. Just to be clear, I'm not promising anything. I'll look at what's on that drive, but that's all I'm asking, Eleanor assured him. Thank you, Frank. After he left, Eleanor remained in the archive room for another hour, gathering select documents and photographs that chronicled Harrington's true history. If Monday's corporate execution couldn't be avoided, at least she would preserve the authentic record of what her father had built. As she finally prepared to leave, her phone chimed with an incoming message. She expected it to be from Frank, but instead saw James Whitfield's name on the screen. Ellie, we need to talk. Brunch at the Charles, 11:30. Important developments. Eleanor stared at the message, anger and betrayal rising afresh. James, her CFO, her supposed friend for 4 decades, who had led the charge to sell her company, who had sat beside her through her divorce, her son's college graduation, her father's funeral, only to stab her in the back when global tech dangled the right incentives. She typed a response. Sorry, busy today. Monday is soon enough. Then, gathering the materials she had collected, she locked the archive room behind her and headed for her car, the mysterious USB drive secure in her pocket. The Beacon Hill apartment felt different when Eleanor returned, no longer a mausoleum for her corporate success, but a base of operations for whatever came next. She cleared her dining room table, spreading out the documents she had retrieved from the archive. Then, with almost reverent care, she inserted the USB drive into a secure, non-networked laptop she kept for sensitive company business. The drive contained a single encrypted file named simply Phoenix PXE. Eleanor tried several passwords based on her father's usual patterns, but none worked. After the third failed attempt, a security prompt appeared, Wingspread. It was a verification question, not a password request. Eleanor frowned, uncertain of the expected response. Her father had used dozens of security questions over the years. What was special about Wingspread? The answer came to her suddenly, a childhood memory of her father taking her to the airport to watch planes take off and land. She had asked which bird had the most impressive wingspan, and he had told her about the American bald eagle, its wings stretching over 7 feet. Magnificent, he had said, built for both power and precision. She typed 7 feet 2 inches. The file began to decrypt. What emerged was not a complete software package or even a coherent set of technical specifications, but rather a conceptual framework, pages of theoretical mathematics, flow diagrams, and Thomas Harrington's notes about applying encryption principles to a completely new domain, logistics and supply chain management. Eleanor scrolled through the documents, trying to understand her father's vision. Phoenix wasn't just an encryption system. It was a complete reimagining of how secure data could flow through physical supply chains, protecting everything from military equipment to consumer goods against tampering, counterfeiting, and theft. It was revolutionary, but also incomplete. Her father had died before he could fully develop the implementation strategy. The concepts were sound, the mathematics elegant, but translating theory into functional software would require someone with exceptional understanding of both encryption algorithms and practical coding. Someone like Frank Miller. Eleanor checked the time, 10:45 a.m., more than 2 hours before Frank and his daughter would arrive. She used the time to organize the Phoenix materials, breaking down the concepts into more digestible segments. As she worked, she found herself drawn into her father's vision, seeing the elegance of his approach, the forward-thinking nature of a system designed decades before supply chain security became the critical issue it was today. At precisely 1:00 p.m., her doorbell rang. Eleanor smoothed her hair, suddenly aware that she was dressed more casually than Frank had ever seen her, and opened the door to find Frank and a small, serious-looking girl with intelligent blue eyes. "Eleanor, this is my daughter Sarah," Frank said. Sarah, this is Ms. Harrington, the lady I told you about. The one whose company is being stolen, Sarah said matter-of-factly, extending her hand with adult formality. It's nice to meet you, Ms. Harrington. Dad says you might need our help. Eleanor smiled, charmed by the child's directness. It's nice to meet you too, Sarah. And yes, I could definitely use some help. She gestured them inside. Taimatu. Please come in. I've ordered sandwiches from the deli downstairs. They should be here any minute. Sarah entered first, her eyes widening as she took in the apartment's expansive view of Boston Harbor. Whoa, you can see everything from here. Almost everything, Eleanor agreed, leading them to the dining room where the Phoenix documents were arranged. Did you enjoy the Science Museum? It was acceptable, Sarah said with the critical assessment of a young prodigy. Their coding exhibit needs updating, though. They're still showcasing programming techniques from 2015. Frank gave Eleanor an apologetic smile. Sarah has strong opinions about computer science education. I like strong opinions, Eleanor said, genuinely amused. They usually come from strong minds. Sarah beamed at the compliment, then immediately gravitated toward the spread of technical documents on the dining table. What's all this? That Frank said, placing a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder, is grown-up work stuff that we're going to help Ms. Harrington with after lunch. The doorbell rang again, the deli delivery. While Eleanor paid for the food, Frank discreetly examined the Phoenix materials, his expression growing increasingly focused as he recognized the significance of what he was seeing. Over lunch, Sarah dominated the conversation with detailed descriptions of the museum's exhibits, particularly the shortcomings of their technology displays. Eleanor found herself genuinely enjoying the girl's enthusiasm and critical thinking, so reminiscent of her own childhood passion for taking things apart to understand how they worked. Dad says you started your company when you were just a teenager, Sarah said between bites of her sandwich. That's pretty cool. My father started it, Eleanor corrected. I joined officially after college, though I was involved from the beginning. Dad helped build DOS, Sarah announced proudly. That's like super important in computer history. Did you know that? Eleanor smiled. I recently learned that, yes, your father is being modest about his contributions to technology. Frank looked uncomfortable with the attention. Ancient history, like I said. But history matters, Eleanor insisted. That's why I've been digging through the company archives. Our past shapes everything we build today, whether we acknowledge it or not. After lunch, Sarah settled in the living room with a book she had brought, not a children's story, Eleanor noticed, but a technical manual on Python programming that would challenge most college students. Frank joined Eleanor at the dining table, finally giving the Phoenix materials his full attention. For the next hour, they barely spoke as Frank absorbed the details of Thomas Harrington's final project. Eleanor watched his face, noting the moments of recognition, the subtle nods of appreciation for particularly elegant solutions, the occasional frown at conceptual gaps. This is, Frank finally said, looking up from the documents. This is remarkable. Your father was working at least 20 years ahead of his time. This framework anticipates problems in supply chain security that the industry is only beginning to grapple with now. But it's incomplete, Eleanor said. That's what I'm seeing. The theoretical foundation is solid, but the implementation strategy is missing. Frank nodded. Thomas died before he could bridge that gap between concept and execution. He tapped a section of complex mathematics. This is the core algorithm, a variation on what we developed for Eagle, but with additional layers for physical verification protocols. Could it be completed? Eleanor asked, the critical question hanging between them. Could Phoenix rise again? Frank leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he considered the challenge. Maybe. With the right team, the right resources. It would take time, though. More time than you have before Monday's board vote. What if we're not trying to build the complete system? Eleanor suggested, leaning forward intently. What if we just need a working prototype? Something compelling enough to show the board to demonstrate that Harrington still has revolutionary technology in development. A proof of concept, Frank mused. It's possible, but even that would require intensive coding testing. We have the weekend, Eleanor said, aware of how desperate she sounded. I know it's not much time, but it's not enough, Frank said gently. Not for me, anyway. I haven't done serious coding in years. My skills are rusty, outdated. From the living room doorway came Sarah's voice. I could help. They both turned to find her standing there, the programming manual closed in her hands, her expression serious beyond her years. Sarah, Frank began, his tone carrying a warning. This is complicated adult work. I saw the mathematics, she said, approaching the table. It's an encryption algorithm with physical verification protocols, like blockchain, but for real objects. She pointed to a section of the documentation. This part is incomplete. You need to bridge the gap between the theoretical construct and practical implementation. Eleanor stared at the child, astonished. You understand this? Frank sighed, a mixture of pride and concern crossing his features. Sarah is special. She has an unusual aptitude for patterns mathematics programming. The school psychologist calls her a savant, exceptional cognitive abilities in specific domains. I'm good with codes, Sarah said simply. Always have been. Dad's been teaching me programming since I was 5. Eleanor looked from daughter to father, seeing not just the physical resemblance, but the same quiet intensity, the same methodical approach to problems. Frank, is she really capable of understanding this level of cryptography? Understanding it, yes, Frank acknowledged. Implementing it, that's different. She's still learning practical coding skills, professional development environments. But you know those things, Sarah pointed out. You could do the implementation if I help with the algorithm refinement. It's still not enough, Frank said, shaking his head. Even together, we'd need days, maybe weeks, to create a working prototype. Improper testing equipment, development servers. I have those, Eleanor said quickly. Harrington maintains a complete R&D lab on the 14th floor, state-of-the-art equipment isolated from the main corporate network for security. And you have access even on weekends. I'm still CEO until Monday afternoon, Eleanor reminded him. My biometrics override any security protocol in the building. Frank looked torn, glancing from the Phoenix documents to his daughter, then back to Eleanor. This is a lot to take on. Even if we manage to create something, there's no guarantee it would change the board's decision. No, Eleanor agreed, but right now, Global Tech is buying Harrington because they think we're past our prime, that our innovation peaked years ago. If we can show that Thomas Harrington's final project was decades ahead of its time and that we have the capability to complete it, it changes the narrative. It might not stop the sale, but it could change the terms, preserve more of the company's independence. Frank was silent for a long moment, visibly wrestling with the decision. Then Sarah spoke again, her young voice carrying surprising conviction. Dad, remember what you always tell me about the Wright brothers, how they built their plane in a bicycle shop with nobody believing in them. Frank's expression softened. Sarah, you said innovation doesn't come from big companies with lots of money. It comes from people who believe in something even when everyone else says it's impossible. Sarah placed her small hand on her father's arm. We should help Ms. Harrington. It's the right thing to do. Eleanor watched this exchange with a tightness in her throat, moved by the child's simple wisdom and Frank's evident struggle between caution and conviction. Finally, Frank nodded, decision made. We'll need access to the R&D lab tonight after regular security shifts change. Less chance of attracting attention that way. I can arrange that, Eleanor said, relief flooding through her. We'll enter through the executive garage. My credentials will get us in without being logged in the main visitor system. And we'll need development equipment, specific software packages, testing environments. Whatever you need, Eleanor promised. Make a list. As Frank began writing down technical requirements, Sarah returned to the living room, resuming her study of the programming manual with renewed purpose. Eleanor watched her for a moment, marveling at the unlikely allies she had found in this maintenance worker and his remarkable daughter. Frank, she said quietly, thank you for this. I know it's a lot to ask. He looked up from his list, his blue eyes serious. I'm not doing it just for you. Some things are worth preserving, worth fighting for. Your father understood that. He built things to last, to matter. A shadow crossed his face. There's not much of that left in this industry. It's all quarterly profits and planned obsolescence now. Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. This isn't just about saving my company, is it? It's about preserving a vision of technology that serves something more than shareholder value. Maybe, Frank acknowledged, or maybe I'm just an old programmer who wants one more chance to build something that matters. He returned to his list, adding several more items. We should get to the lab by 8 tonight. That gives us about 36 hours before the markets open on Monday. 36 hours to resurrect Phoenix, Eleanor said, the challenge energizing rather than daunting her. For the first time since the board meeting, she felt something like hope flickering in her chest. By 8:15 p.m., Eleanor's Tesla was pulling into the deserted executive garage beneath Harrington Systems. Frank sat beside her, a backpack containing his personal laptop and various tools resting between his feet. Sarah dozed in the back seat, her small body curved around her own backpack, stuffed with programming books and a well-worn stuffed triceratops. "Should I wake her?" Eleanor asked, parking in her reserved space. Frank shook his head. "Let her sleep a bit longer. We'll need her fresh later." They made their way to the executive elevator, Eleanor's biometric scan granting them access without triggering the visitor logging system. The R&D floor was dark and silent, illuminated only by the soft blue glow of standby lights on various equipment. Eleanor led them to a glass-walled laboratory in the northeast corner, the most secure section of the R&D division reserved for the company's most sensitive projects. Another biometric scan granted them entry, and the lights automatically activated at their presence. "Impressive," Frank commented, taking in the cutting-edge development environment. "Last time I worked in a lab like this, computers still took up entire walls." Eleanor moved to the central workstation and began initializing the systems. "Harrington has always prioritized R&D investment, even during downturns. It's one of the principles my father established that I've maintained." Frank set up his own equipment at an adjacent workstation connecting to the lab's secure network with the credentials Eleanor provided. While they worked, Sarah stirred, waking naturally as if her internal clock recognized that it was time to contribute. "Where are we, she asked sleepily, rubbing her eyes. "Harrington Systems R&D Lab," Frank told her. "The big leagues, kiddo, you up for this?" Sarah's eyes widened as she took in the advanced technology surrounding them. "Whoa!" Then straightening her shoulders with determined dignity, she nodded. "I'm ready." For the next several hours, they worked as a surprisingly effective team. Frank's deep understanding of system architecture and practical implementation complemented Eleanor's comprehensive knowledge of Harrington's existing security infrastructure. Sarah, once fully awake, demonstrated an uncanny ability to identify patterns in the Phoenix algorithm that neither adult had recognized, her mind unencumbered by conventional approaches. By midnight, they had established a basic framework for a Phoenix prototype, a simplified version of Thomas Harrington's vision that could demonstrate the concept's potential. Frank was immersed in coding his fingers, moving across the keyboard with the muscle memory of decades of programming experience. Eleanor coordinated the integration with Harrington's existing systems, while Sarah sketched algorithm refinements on a digital whiteboard with the absorbed concentration of a master artist. Around 1:30 a.m., Eleanor ordered food delivered to the building's security desk, then went down to retrieve it. When she returned to the lab, she found Frank standing behind Sarah, watching with undisguised pride as his daughter explained a complex mathematical solution to a problem they had encountered. "She's extraordinary," Eleanor said quietly, setting down the bags of food. Frank nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and something else, concern perhaps. "She is. Most of the time it feels like more of a responsibility than a blessing. The world isn't always kind to people who are different." "I know something about that," Eleanor replied. "Being a female CEO in tech, especially in the early days, it wasn't easy." "But you had your father's name, his company," Frank observed, not unkindly. "Sarah will have to make her own way." "She'll have you," Eleanor said. "That counts for a lot." They ate quickly, refueling for the long night ahead. As they worked through the early morning hours, Eleanor found herself repeatedly glancing at Frank, seeing him in a new light. This wasn't the maintenance worker she had met in the basement archive. This was the brilliant programmer her father had collaborated with, the innovator whose work had helped build Harrington's reputation for excellence. Around 4:00 a.m., Sarah finally succumbed to exhaustion, curling up on a small couch in the lab's break area, her triceratops clutched against her chest. Frank covered her with his jacket, then returned to his workstation, determination etched in the lines of his face. "She's an amazing child," Eleanor said softly, watching the sleeping girl. "You've done a remarkable job raising her, especially as a single father." Frank's expression softened. "She makes it easy most of the time. Too smart for her own good, but she has a good heart." He turned back to his screen, typing a few commands before continuing. "Her mother would have been proud of who she's becoming." "You mentioned your wife passed away. Cancer, you said. Frank nodded, his focus still on the code before him. Pancreatic, stage 4 by the time they found it, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. His voice was steady, but Eleanor heard the underlying pain. Sarah was just 2. Doesn't really remember her mother now, except through photographs. I'm sorry, Eleanor said, meaning it. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was. Frank's typing paused, his hands hovering over the keyboard. The timing couldn't have been worse. The medical bills wiped out our savings. Then the housing market collapsed, the tech industry started massive layoffs. Microplex cut me loose in the first round. A bitter smile crossed his lips. Apparently 30 years of experience made me too expensive compared to fresh graduates willing to work for half my salary. Eleanor hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering her since their discovery in the archive room. Frank, why didn't you ever contact me? After my father died, you must have known how valuable your contributions to Eagle were. Frank was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the screen. I tried, actually, sent several emails, left messages with your assistant. This was around 2008 when everything was falling apart for me. I thought maybe, given our history, our work together on Eagle. I never received any messages, Eleanor said, genuinely surprised. My assistant at that time was Diane Matthews. She never mentioned it, not Matthews. Someone before her. Young guy, very protective of your time. Frank shrugged. Doesn't matter now. Water under the bridge. But Eleanor's mind was racing, piecing together the timeline. James, she said suddenly, James Whitfield was acting as my interim assistant for a few months after Diane's predecessor left, before he became CFO. Whitfield, Frank repeated, recognition dawning. Tall guy, always in expensive suits, very polished. That's him, my oldest friend in the company, or so I thought. Eleanor's voice hardened. The same man who orchestrated the global tech sale behind my back. Frank's expression changed, a new tension evident in his posture. Whitfield, he said again, more quietly this time. I know that name from somewhere else. He's been with Harrington almost from the beginning. Started in finance, worked his way up. Frank shook his head. No, it's something else. Something your father mentioned once. He turned to Eleanor, his blue eyes intense. Does the name Richard Whitfield mean anything to you? Eleanor frowned, searching her memory. Richard? Wait, that was James's father. He and my dad were colleagues at MIT, I think. They had some kind of falling out before Harrington was founded. It was more than a falling out, Frank said slowly, the pieces assembling in his mind. Your father mentioned it once, said Richard Whitfield had tried to claim credit for work they'd done together, tried to patent it separately. There was a legal battle. Thomas won, but it ended their friendship. And then Thomas hired Richard's son years later, Eleanor mused. I remember now my father was reluctant at first, but James had excellent qualifications, and he convinced Dad that he wasn't responsible for his father's actions. When did James become CFO? Frank asked, his expression growing more concerned. 2010, after the previous CFO retired. Eleanor's eyes widened as she began to see where Frank's thoughts were leading. You think this is personal for him, that he's been planning this for years? I don't know, Frank admitted, but it's a hell of a coincidence that the son of the man your father defeated is now orchestrating the end of his company. They stared at each other, the implication hanging between them. Then Frank glanced at his sleeping daughter and lowered his voice. If James deliberately intercepted my messages back in 2008, if he's been positioning himself all these years just to take control of Harrington, then this isn't just a business decision, Eleanor finished. It's revenge. The weight of this possibility settled over them, casting the weekend's desperate work in a new light. This wasn't just about saving Harrington Systems as a company. It was about preserving Thomas Harrington's legacy against a deliberate attempt to erase it from history. Frank turned back to his workstation with renewed determination. We need to finish this prototype, not just to save the company, but to protect your father's final innovation from falling into the wrong hands. Eleanor nodded, her own resolve strengthening. If James has been planning this for years, he won't stop just because we demonstrate a promising prototype. We need more. We need proof of his true motives. First thing first, Frank said, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Let's make Phoenix fly, then we'll worry about James Whitfield's vendetta. As the first gray light of Sunday morning filtered through the lab's windows, they worked with the focused intensity of soldiers preparing for battle. The prototype began taking shape not just as lines of code and theoretical constructs, but as a functioning system that could track and secure physical objects through complex supply chains, preventing tampering and ensuring authenticity at every stage. At 7:42 a.m., Sarah woke immediately, rejoining the effort without complaint or confusion. By noon, they had a working demonstration using RFID chips and Harrington's existing security protocols enhanced with the Phoenix algorithm. "It's crude compared to what your father envisioned," Frank acknowledged as they tested the system on various objects around the lab. "But it proves the concept is viable. With proper development, this could revolutionize supply chain security." Eleanor nodded, watching as the system successfully detected a minor tampering attempt on a sealed package. "It's more than I hoped for, but will it be enough to convince the board that Harrington still has innovative potential worth preserving?" "Maybe," Frank said. "But you're right about needing more. If James is motivated by personal revenge rather than business logic, a promising prototype won't change his mind." "We need leverage," Eleanor said, pacing the lab. "Something that would force him to reconsider or at least delay the vote." Sarah, who had been quietly working at her own terminal, suddenly spoke up. "What about his emails?" Both adults turned to her. "His emails," Eleanor repeated. Sarah nodded. "If he's been planning this for years, wouldn't there be evidence? People always leave digital trails. Dad says that's the first rule of cybersecurity: humans are the weakest link." Frank looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Sarah, we can't just hack into the CFO's email account. That would be illegal, not to mention ethically problematic." "Not if Ms. Harrington authorizes it," Sarah pointed out with child's logic. "She's still the CEO, right? And if she suspects corporate, what's the word for when someone inside the company does bad things?" "Malfeasance," Eleanor supplied, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "Corporate malfeasance or breach of fiduciary duty." "Right, that," Sarah nodded. "If she suspects that, doesn't she have a responsibility to investigate?" Frank and Eleanor exchanged looks, both recognizing the dangerous territory they were approaching. "There are legal protocols for internal investigations," Eleanor said carefully. "But they take time, which we don't have." "And they'd alert James immediately," Frank added. "If he's been careful all these years, he'd destroy any evidence before an official investigation could find it." They fell silent, the ethical dilemma hanging between them. Then Eleanor's phone chimed with an incoming text. She glanced at it, her expression hardening. "It's James again. He's been texting all morning trying to arrange a meeting before tomorrow." She showed them the message. "Ellie, please. One conversation before the vote. There are aspects of the deal you don't understand. Let me explain over dinner tonight. The Wellington, 7 p.m. "He sounds desperate to talk to you," Frank observed, "or to make sure I don't find something before tomorrow's vote." Eleanor countered, a new resolve forming in her mind. "Sarah's right. If James has been planning this for years, there must be evidence. And as CEO, I do have the authority to access company communications if I suspect misconduct." "Eleanor," Frank cautioned, "this is a gray area legally, and it could backfire spectacularly." "I know, but what choice do I have?" She looked from Frank to Sarah, then back to the Phoenix prototype they had worked through the night to create. "If we're right about James's motives, then this isn't just about saving my company. It's about preventing someone from using corporate acquisition as a weapon of personal revenge." Frank considered this, then nodded slowly. "If we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. Targeted, discreet. We're not looking through all his communications, just anything related to global tech and the acquisition." "I can help narrow the search parameters," Sarah offered eagerly, then caught her father's stern look. "Or, I can just advise from a theoretical perspective." Despite the tension of the moment, Eleanor smiled at the girl's enthusiasm. "Your theoretical perspective would be very welcome, Sarah." For the next hour, they carefully constructed a targeted search of James's corporate communications using Eleanor's executive access and focusing specifically on his interactions with global tech representatives. Sarah, despite Frank's initial reservations, proved invaluable in developing search algorithms that could identify suspicious patterns of communication. What they discovered exceeded even Eleanor's worst suspicions. James had initiated contact with the global tech not after the company's recent difficulties, as the board had been told, but nearly 3 years earlier. The correspondence revealed a carefully orchestrated plan to position Harrington for acquisition, strategic staff changes, subtle redirection of R&D resources away from promising projects, gradual undermining of Eleanor's leadership through carefully planted doubts. Most damning was an email from 6 months ago in which James wrote to Global Tech's CEO, Phase 2 complete, board confidence in at all-time low. Acquisition parameters as discussed. After closing, proceed with Operation Legacy Wipe as planned. Operation Legacy Wipe, Eleanor read aloud, her voice hollow. He's not just selling my company, he's planning to systematically erase every trace of Harrington's contributions to the industry, and likely claim credit for your father's innovations in the process, Frank added grimly. This is personal, all right. Eleanor continued scrolling through the evidence they had uncovered, her initial shock transforming into cold fury. He used me, for years, positioned himself as my most trusted advisor while systematically undermining everything my father built. The question is, Frank said, how do we use this information? If you confront him directly, he'll deny everything, claim you fabricated the evidence. And the board might believe him, Eleanor acknowledged. They've already shown they're willing to accept his version of events over mine. Sarah, who had been unusually quiet during this discovery, suddenly spoke up. What about a trap? Both adults turned to her. A trap, Frank repeated. Sarah nodded, her young face serious beyond her years. In chess, when your opponent thinks they're winning, sometimes you let them think that a little longer so they make a mistake. You set a trap. Eleanor and Frank exchanged looks, understanding dawning simultaneously. The dinner invitation, Eleanor said. James wants to meet tonight to ensure I don't find exactly what we've just discovered. If you go, Frank continued, he'll think his plan is still on track. And meanwhile, Eleanor finished, we can prepare to spring our own surprise at tomorrow's board meeting. Frank nodded slowly, a strategy forming. We need to be careful, though. James has been playing in this game for years. He won't be easily outmaneuvered. No, Eleanor agreed, her determination hardening into resolve. But he's never had to face all three of us before. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the lab windows, they formulated their plan, a counter-strategy to James's years of careful manipulation. The Phoenix prototype would be their technological centerpiece, but the evidence of James's betrayal would be their decisive weapon. It's risky, Frank cautioned as they finalized the details. If we miscalculate, if James anticipates our move, then I lose Harrington's systems, Eleanor acknowledged. But that's happening tomorrow anyway. At least this way I'm fighting back. Sarah, ever practical, looked up from the terminal where she had been helping organize the evidence. What about after? If this works, what happens to Phoenix? It was a question neither adult had considered in their focus on Monday's confrontation. Eleanor looked at Frank, seeing the same realization in his eyes. They had been so concentrated on saving Harrington from Global Tech that they hadn't thought beyond that immediate goal. If we succeed, Eleanor said carefully, Phoenix would become Harrington's new flagship project. We'd need a chief architect to lead the development team, someone who understands the system from its foundations. The implication hung in the air between them. Frank's expression revealed his internal conflict. The opportunity to return to meaningful work in his field weighed against 15 years of adjusted expectations and diminished ambitions. One battle at a time, he said finally. Let's focus on tomorrow's board meeting. After that, we'll see. Eleanor nodded, respecting his caution. Fair enough. She checked her watch. It's almost 5. I should head home to prepare for dinner with James. And we should make sure all the evidence is properly secured, Frank agreed. Multiple backups encrypted, stored in separate locations. I can help with that, Sarah offered, eager to contribute to what she clearly viewed as an exciting clandestine operation. As they prepared to leave the lab, Eleanor paused, looking at the father and daughter who had become her unlikely allies in this desperate last stand. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said, I want you both to know how grateful I am. You've given me something I lost, a reason to fight rather than surrender. Frank's weathered face softened. Thomas Harrington gave me a chance when few others would. He recognized value where others saw only an aging programmer past his prime. I'm just returning the favor to his daughter. Still, Eleanor insisted, thank you. As they stepped into the elevator that would take them back to the executive garage, Eleanor felt a curious sense of calm descend upon her. The despair that had driven her to the basement archives with a bottle of pills seemed like a distant memory replaced by a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow would bring either the end of Harrington Systems as she had known it or the beginning of something new. A second chance not just for her father's company, but for Frank Miller and his remarkable daughter as well. Either way, she would face it with allies by her side and her father's final innovation as her shield. The battle for Thomas Harrington's legacy had begun. The Wellington restaurant occupied the top floor of one of Boston's oldest buildings, its panoramic windows offering diners the same spectacular view of the harbor that Eleanor enjoyed from her apartment. But tonight, as she sat across from James Whitfield at a corner table draped in pristine white linen, the familiar cityscape seemed altered, somehow a backdrop to betrayal rather than a symbol of accomplishment. "You look tired, Ellie," James observed, swirling the Bordeaux in his crystal glass. At 62, he remained handsome in the polished way of men who prioritized appearance as a business asset. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his bespoke suit immaculate, his manicured hands steady as they reached for the wine bottle. "Have you been sleeping?" "Not much," Eleanor admitted, allowing a genuine edge of exhaustion to color her voice. "It's been a difficult weekend." James nodded sympathetically, the performance so convincing that for a moment Eleanor questioned whether the damning emails they had discovered were somehow fabricated. But no, she had seen them with her own eyes, the careful chronicle of his systematic betrayal stretching back years. "I understand," he said, refilling her barely touched glass. "That's why I wanted to meet tonight. I'm worried about you, Ellie. This transition doesn't have to be as painful as you're making it." Eleanor forced herself to maintain eye contact to keep her expression neutral, despite the rage simmering beneath the surface. "Tell me, James, when exactly did you decide that selling Harrington was in the company's best interest?" If her directness startled him, he didn't show it. "You know how I feel about the company, Ellie. This isn't what I wanted. But the market has shifted. Technology has evolved. Global tech is offering us a lifeline when we need it most." "A lifeline?" Eleanor repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "Is that what you call Operation Legacy Wipe?" A flicker so brief she might have missed it had she not been watching for exactly this reaction passed across James's composed features. Then his politician's smile returned, practiced and perfect. "Operation what, Ellie? I'm not following you." "No." Eleanor took a deliberate sip of wine, watching him over the rim of her glass. "Just an odd phrase I heard. Probably nothing important." James studied her for a moment, calculating, assessing. "You've been working on something," he said finally. "Something you think will change the board's mind." It wasn't a question. Eleanor offered him a non-committal smile, neither confirming nor denying. "Ellie," James leaned forward, his voice lowering confidentially, "whatever you're planning won't work. The vote is set. The terms are finalized. Global Tech has already begun transition planning." "Then why are we having dinner?" Eleanor asked. "If everything is so inevitable, why bother with this pretense of concern?" A flash of genuine irritation crossed James's face before he could mask it. "Because despite what you may believe right now, I do care about you. We've been friends for 40 years. I don't want this to end with bitterness." "Friends?" Eleanor echoed the word hollow. "Is that what you call it when someone systematically undermines everything you have built?" James set down his glass, his expression hardening slightly. "I've done nothing but support you, Ellie, even when you have made questionable decisions, even when you've ignored market realities in favor of your father's outdated philosophies." "My father built this company from nothing," Eleanor said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "He created technologies that changed the world. What exactly has Richard Whitfield contributed to American innovation?" James, the mention of his father's name, struck home. James's practiced composure slipped, revealing a glimpse of the cold calculation beneath. "So that's what this is about, ancient history." "Is it?" Eleanor held his gaze. "Sometimes the past isn't as dead as we think. Sometimes it's been quietly shaping the present all along." A tense silence stretched between them, decades of unspoken truths hanging in the balance. Then James signaled the waiter, his movements crisp with barely contained anger. "Check, please. It seems Ms. Harrington isn't feeling well tonight." "On the contrary," Eleanor said, rising from her seat, "I'm feeling clearer than I have in years. Thank you for dinner, James. I'll see you tomorrow at the board meeting." She left without looking back, feeling his eyes boring into her as she crossed the restaurant. Only when she reached the elevator did she allow herself a shaky breath. The confrontation had confirmed what they had suspected. James knew she was planning something, but not what. The element of surprise was still theirs. Outside, the April evening had turned cool, a brisk wind carrying the scent of the harbor. Eleanor's Tesla waited at the valet stand, but instead of heading home, she directed it toward Dorchester. Frank and Sarah were expecting her report on the dinner, and time was running short before tomorrow's showdown. The modest apartment building where Frank lived stood in stark contrast to Eleanor's luxury high-rise. Yet as she climbed the worn stairs to the third floor, she felt none of the condescension that might have colored her perception just days ago. Instead, she found herself reflecting on the irony that this unassuming building housed more genuine technological brilliance than many corporate boardrooms. Frank opened the door before she could knock his expression questioning. "How did it go?" "About as expected," Eleanor replied, stepping inside. "He knows we're planning something, but not what. And he definitely reacted when I mentioned Operation Legacy Wipe." The apartment was small but meticulously organized, the living space dominated by bookshelves filled with technical manuals and classic literature, a well-worn couch facing a modest television, and the corner workstation where Sarah sat still, diligently processing the evidence they had gathered. "Dad and I have been organizing everything," Sarah announced without looking up from her task. "We've got the prototype documentation, James's emails, and a timeline of suspicious activities all ready for your presentation." She insisted on helping, Frank explained with a mixture of pride and resignation. Wouldn't take no for an answer. "Good," Eleanor said, squeezing the girl's shoulder appreciatively. "We need all hands on deck for this." They gathered around the kitchen table where Frank had set up a makeshift command center, laptops, print-outs of key evidence, and a detailed plan for tomorrow's confrontation. "I've been thinking about our approach," Frank said, his military background evident in the precision of his planning. "The board meeting starts at 2 p.m. You'll need to control the narrative from the first moment. If James gets ahead of you—" "He won't," Eleanor assured him. "I've called in a few favors. We'll have some unexpected allies in that room." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Care to share with the rest of the team?" "William Harrison," Eleanor said. "Remember the senator you mentioned, your old military buddy?" Frank's eyes widened. "Bill, how did you I have my resources." Eleanor smiled. "Turns out Senator Harrison sits on the Commerce Committee's Technology Oversight Panel. He was very interested to hear about a potential foreign influence over critical American security technology." "You told him about Global Tech's international connections," Frank realized, impressed. "I may have mentioned certain concerns about proprietary American innovations being acquired by entities with questionable allegiances." Eleanor's smile turned slightly predatory. "The senator has agreed to attend our board meeting as an interested governmental observer. His presence alone will throw James off balance." Frank nodded appreciatively. "Good move. But we'll still need irrefutable evidence if we're going to turn the board against a deal they've already approved in principle." "That's where you come in," Eleanor said. "The Phoenix prototype is our technological centerpiece. If you can demonstrate its potential, show them that Harrington isn't past its prime but actually years ahead of the competition, it changes the entire value proposition of the company." "And if that's not enough," Frank asked the practical soldier, assessing all contingencies. Eleanor's expression hardened. "Then we go nuclear with the evidence of James's betrayal. But I'd prefer to win on innovation rather than scandal. That's what my father would have wanted." They worked late into the night, refining their strategy, preparing for every possible countermove James might make. Sarah eventually fell asleep on the couch, her small form curled protectively around her Triceratops toy. Frank covered her with a blanket, his weathered face softening as he watched his daughter. "She's all in on this mission," he said quietly. "Thinks we're some kind of corporate Avengers taking down the bad guys." "Isn't that what we are?" Eleanor asked, only half joking. Frank's expression turned serious. "What happens after, Eleanor? If we succeed tomorrow, if we stop the Kinpo, what then?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Eleanor glanced at Sarah's sleeping form, then back to Frank. "I meant what I said earlier. Phoenix needs a chief architect who understands it from the ground up. That's you, Frank. If we save Harrington, there's a place for you there. A real place, not a maintenance position." Frank hesitated, conflicting emotions playing across his features. It's been a long time since I worked in that world. Technology has changed. I've changed. Some things don't change, Eleanor said softly. Talent, vision, the ability to build something that matters. She met his gaze directly. My father saw those qualities in you 25 years ago. I see them now. For a moment, something electric passed between them, a connection forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. Then Frank looked away, his pragmatic nature reasserting itself. Let's focus on saving the company first, he said. After that, we'll see. Eleanor nodded, accepting his caution. One battle at a time. They parted shortly after midnight, Eleanor returning to her apartment to prepare for the most important presentation of her career. As she drove through Boston's quiet streets, she found herself contemplating the strange turns of fate that had brought her to this moment, from the depths of suicidal despair to this renewed sense of purpose in just 72 hours. If someone had told her on Friday that her company's fate would rest on the shoulders of a maintenance worker and his 8-year-old daughter, she would have dismissed them as delusional. Yet here she was, entrusting everything to Frank Miller, a man who had helped build the technological foundations of modern computing before being discarded by an industry that valued youth over experience, innovation over wisdom. There was a lesson in that, Eleanor thought. Perhaps the same lesson her father had understood when he built that hidden room beneath Harrington Systems, that true innovation often comes from unexpected places, from people the mainstream has overlooked or forgotten. Morning arrived with the crystalline clarity that sometimes follows a sleepless night. Eleanor dressed with deliberate care, choosing not her usual power suit, but a deep blue dress her father had always admired, accented with her mother's pearl necklace. Today wasn't about corporate authority. It was about legacy, about the human story behind the technology. Frank and Sarah arrived at her apartment at noon, both dressed in their Sunday best, Frank in a slightly outdated but immaculately pressed suit, Sarah in a flowered dress that made her look both younger and somehow more serious. They carried with them the Phoenix prototype, secured in a specialized case Frank had constructed overnight. You look nice, Sarah told Eleanor with childish directness, like a queen going to battle. Eleanor smiled, touched by the girl's perception. Thank you, Sarah. That's exactly how I feel. Frank, ever practical, was reviewing their strategy one final time. Remember, we lead with innovation, not accusation. Phoenix first, James's betrayal only if necessary. Agreed, Eleanor said. And you're sure the prototype will function as demonstrated? No technical glitches. We tested it repeatedly this morning, Frank assured her. It's as solid as it can be, given the compressed development timeline. And Senator Harrison confirmed his attendance 15 minutes ago, Frank said. He'll meet us at Harrington. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor found herself seized by a sudden wave of doubt. What if it's not enough? What if the board is so committed to this deal that nothing we show them matters? Frank considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. Then at least you'll know you fought with everything you had. Sometimes that's all we can do. He offered a small, encouraging smile. But I wouldn't count us out just yet. We've got something James doesn't. What's that? The truth, Frank said simply. And a really good encryption algorithm. The journey to Harrington Systems passed in focused silence, each of them mentally preparing for the confrontation ahead. Eleanor parked in her reserved space for what might be the last time, then led Frank and Sarah through the executive entrance, bypassing the main lobby, where curious employees had gathered, sensing something momentous in the air. They arrived on the executive floor to find Senator William Harrison already waiting, a distinguished man in his mid-60s with the erect posture of his military background still evident beneath his senatorial polish. He greeted Frank with the easy familiarity of old comrades. Miller, you old warhorse, he said, clasping Frank's hand warmly. Couldn't believe it when Miss Harrington told me you were involved in this. Still fighting the good fight, I see. Some battles choose us, sir, Frank replied with a respectful nod. This is my daughter, Sarah. The senator bent slightly to shake Sarah's hand with the same dignified courtesy he might offer a foreign diplomat. A pleasure, young lady. Your father was one of the finest soldiers I ever served with. Saved my life in Kuwait, did he tell you that? Sarah's eyes widened. No, sir. Dad doesn't talk much about the war. Never did, Harrison agreed, straightening. Too busy doing the job while others talked about it. He turned to Eleanor. Ms. Harrington, I've reviewed the materials you sent over. If your concerns about foreign interference in proprietary American technology prove founded, the Commerce Committee will take a very serious interest in this acquisition. Thank you for coming, Senator, Eleanor said. Your presence alone sends an important message about the national security implications of this sale. At precisely 1:55 p.m., they entered the boardroom together, a strategic formation that immediately captured the attention of everyone present. The board members already seated around the massive oak table reacted with varying degrees of surprise at the unexpected additions to what should have been a routine vote. James Whitfield, positioned at the far end of the table in what would normally have been Eleanor's chair, froze momentarily, his practiced composure slipping at the sight of Senator Harrison. Eleanor, he recovered quickly, rising to his feet. We weren't expecting additional guests. The agenda today is quite straightforward. I've amended the agenda, James, Eleanor interrupted smoothly, taking control of the narrative as they had planned. Before any vote occurs, the board deserves to see what Harrington Systems is actually capable of developing. She gestured to Frank, who placed the prototype case on the table. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Senator Harrison, allow me to introduce Frank Miller. Frank stepped forward, his initial nervousness giving way to the quiet confidence of a man who knew his subject intimately. Good afternoon, my name is Frank Miller. Some of you may recognize me as part of the maintenance staff, but before that I was a software engineer who worked with Thomas Harrington on Project Eagle, the encryption system that became Harrington's flagship technology. A murmur ran through the board members. James's expression darkened, but he remained silent, watching. What you're about to see, Frank continued, opening the case to reveal the prototype, is the evolution of that technology, a system Thomas Harrington was developing before his death, which we've now brought to functional prototype stage. We call it Phoenix. For the next 20 minutes, Frank and Eleanor demonstrated the Phoenix system, showing how it could track and secure physical objects through complex supply chains, preventing tampering and ensuring authenticity at every stage. Sarah assisted by deliberately attempting to hack the system, showing how Phoenix's advanced algorithms detected and prevented even sophisticated interference. The board members watched with increasing interest, several leaning forward as the implications became clear. This wasn't just an incremental improvement on existing technology, it was a paradigm shift in supply chain security. The applications are virtually limitless, Eleanor explained, as Frank concluded the technical demonstration. From military logistics to pharmaceutical supply chains, from luxury goods, authentication to critical infrastructure protection, Phoenix represents not just the next generation of Harrington security systems, but a completely new market segment with massive growth potential. Senator Harrison spoke up, his authoritative voice commanding instant attention. I can confirm that the Department of Defense has identified supply chain security as a critical priority for the next decade. Technology of this nature would be of significant interest to multiple governmental agencies. James finally rose from his seat, his face a mask of controlled fury. This is all very impressive, Eleanor. A weekend prototype cobbled together by a maintenance worker and his child. But it doesn't change the fundamental reality of Harrington's market position. The global tech offer represents the best path forward for our shareholders. Does it, Eleanor challenged, moving to the confrontation phase of their strategy? Or does it represent the best path forward for your personal agenda, James? A tense silence fell over the room. Eleanor nodded to Sarah, who activated the large display screen at the front of the boardroom. James's damning emails appeared highlighted and annotated for clarity. 3 years ago, Eleanor said, her voice steady, James Whitfield initiated contact with Global Tech not as a potential business partner, but as a collaborator in what these emails describe it as Operation Legacy Wipe, a systematic plan to acquire Harrington Systems, strip it of its innovative technologies, and erase its contributions to American technological history. The board members exchanged shocked glances, several reaching for copies of the emails that Sarah now distributed. This is absurd, James protested, though his complexion had paled noticeably. These are obviously fabricated. They were retrieved directly from the Harrington Secure server. Eleanor cut him off. Using my executive access and witnessed by multiple parties. The metadata and authentication certificates are intact and verifiable. Senator Harrison examined the documents with the careful attention of a man accustomed to evaluating evidence. If these communications are genuine, they raise serious concerns about corporate espionage and potentially illegal disclosure of proprietary technologies to foreign entities. This is a desperate attempt to derail a legitimate business transaction, James insisted, looking to the board members for support. Eleanor is unable to accept the reality that her time as CEO has reached its natural conclusion. She's manufacturing conspiracy theories to maintain control. Am I? Eleanor asked quietly. She nodded to Sarah again, who brought up a new document on the screen, a legal complaint filed against Thomas Harrington in 1981 by Richard Whitfield, James's father. For those who don't know their history, Eleanor explained, Richard Whitfield was my father's colleague at MIT. He attempted to claim sole credit for work they had done together, tried to patent it separately. My father prevailed in court, but lost a friendship. She turned to James. And it seems his son has been planning revenge ever since. James's composed facade finally cracked, raw anger bleeding through. Your father stole everything from mine. Richard Whitfield should have been recognized as a pioneer of modern computing, but Thomas Harrington rewrote history, pushed him out, took all the credit. The naked emotion in his outburst stunned the boardroom into silence. For a moment, James seemed to realize how much he had revealed. He straightened his tie, attempting to regain his professional demeanor. This is irrelevant to today's vote, he said, his voice strained. The global tech offer remains on the table. It represents significant value for all shareholders. Does it, Eleanor challenged, or does it represent the culmination of your personal vendetta against my father, a man who's been dead for nearly 30 years? She addressed the board directly. Ladies and gentlemen, you're not just voting on a corporate acquisition today. You're voting on whether to allow Harrington Systems, an American innovation pioneer, to be dismantled by someone whose primary motivation is personal revenge. The oldest board member, Harold Jenkins, who had served since the company's founding, spoke up for the first time. James, is this true? Has this been about your father all along? James hesitated, trapped between denial and the damning evidence before them. In that moment of silence, his guilt was effectively confirmed. I think, Senator Harrison said into the tense quiet, that given these revelations and the clear national security implications of the Phoenix technology, the prudent course would be to table this vote pending a more thorough investigation. Several board members nodded in agreement, the momentum visibly shifting. James looked from face to face, seeing his carefully constructed plan unraveling before him. This changes nothing, he insisted, desperation edging his voice. Global Tech's offer expires today. If we delay the vote, the deal is dead. Perhaps that's for the best, Jenkins replied, his elderly face stern with disapproval. I, for one, am not comfortable proceeding under these circumstances. One by one, the board members voiced similar concerns. The unified front that James had cultivated was crumbling, replaced by uncertainty, and a growing sense that they had nearly made a catastrophic mistake. In the end, the vote was unanimous. The Global Tech acquisition would be suspended, pending full investigation of James's communications and proper evaluation of the Phoenix technology's potential. James Whitfield, the architect of what would have been Harrington's demise, sat in stunned silence as his 40-year plan collapsed in less than 40 minutes. This isn't over, Eleanor, he said, finally gathering his papers with shaking hands. You've bought time, nothing more. No, James, Eleanor replied calmly. What I've done is reclaim my father's company. Your resignation letter will be on my desk by morning, or the evidence of your corporate espionage goes to the FBI. As James stormed from the boardroom, the remaining board members clustered around the Phoenix prototype, their earlier skepticism transformed into eager curiosity. Senator Harrison pulled Frank aside for a quiet conversation, while Sarah basked in the validation of her contribution to their victory. Eleanor stood for a moment watching this tableau with a sense of wonder. 72 hours ago, she had been ready to end her life in a forgotten basement archive. Now she stood triumphant, her company saved her father's legacy, preserved, and her own future suddenly rich with new possibilities. Frank approached her, a tentative smile on his weathered face. Looks like we did it. We did, Eleanor agreed, uncharacteristic tears pricking at her eyes. Thank you, Frank. You and Sarah. I don't have words. No thanks necessary, he said simply. It was the right thing to do. He glanced over at his daughter, who was earnestly explaining some aspect of the Phoenix system to an impressed board member. She's going to be impossible to live with after this, you know. Already talking about improvements to the prototype. She's extraordinary, Eleanor said, like her father. Frank looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. About that job offer. Eleanor held her breath, suddenly afraid he would decline. I'd like to accept, he continued, surprising her. But with conditions. Name them. Flexible hours. I'm still a single dad and Sarah comes first. He met her gaze directly. And I want to establish a STEM scholarship program for kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. Too much talent gets wasted because of financial barriers. Eleanor smiled, relief flooding through her. Done and done. Anything else? Frank hesitated, then added, I want the archive room preserved, not just as storage, but as a proper historical record of American innovation. Your father's legacy and all the others who built this industry documented, honored, remembered. I think that's a wonderful idea, Eleanor said softly. A museum of sorts, the Thomas Harrington Innovation Archive, with a special section on the contributions of Richard Whitfield. Frank suggested, surprising her. Healing old wounds seems like a good place to start a new chapter. Eleanor considered this, then nodded slowly. You're right. Legacy isn't about erasing others to elevate ourselves. It's about acknowledging the full complex truth of how innovation really happens. As the board meeting concluded, Eleanor found herself standing with Frank and Sarah before the wall of windows that overlooked Boston Harbor, the same view she had contemplated in despair just 3 days earlier, now transformed by their unlikely alliance into a vista of possibility. What happens now? Sarah asked, her young face serious with the weight of adult concerns. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Frank, seeing in his blue eyes the same cautious hope she felt blossoming in her own heart. Now, she said, placing one hand on Sarah's shoulder and the other on the Phoenix prototype, we build something that lasts. 6 months later, on a crisp October afternoon, a small ceremony took place in the Harrington Systems lobby. The Thomas Harrington Innovation Archive was officially open to the public, a museum space chronicling the authentic history of American computing, with special emphasis on the overlooked contributors whose names had often been omitted from the standard narratives. The centerpiece was a glass case containing the original Eagle Project documents displayed alongside the Phoenix prototype that had saved the company. A plaque acknowledged the contributions of both Thomas Harrington and Frank Miller to these revolutionary technologies, with a special note recognizing Sarah Miller as the youngest contributor to Phoenix's development. Nearby, a smaller display honored Richard Whitfield's early work in computing, acknowledging his significant contributions, while also documenting the painful legal dispute that had tarnished his legacy. James Whitfield, facing federal charges for corporate espionage, had declined to attend the opening, but his father's remaining colleagues from MIT had come expressing gratitude for the belated recognition. As visitors explored the exhibits, Eleanor stood with Frank in the quiet of her office, watching through the glass walls as Sarah conducted an impromptu tour for several visiting school children, her enthusiasm infectious as she explained the technological milestones represented in the displays. She's a born teacher, Eleanor observed, among her many talents. Frank nodded, pride evident in his expression. Keeps me on my toes. The Phoenix development team can barely keep up with her suggestions for improvements. In the months since their dramatic confrontation with James Harrington, systems had undergone a renaissance of sorts. With Eleanor firmly re-established as CEO and Frank leading the Phoenix project as chief technology architect, the company had secured major contracts with both government agencies and private sector clients interested in next-generation supply chain security. The board had been restructured, with several new members bringing fresh perspectives on the company's future. Global Tech, faced with Senator Harrison's scrutiny of their international connections, had quietly withdrawn from the American market, focusing instead on less regulated regions. I had an interesting call this morning, Eleanor said, turning from the window to face Frank. NASA is looking for partners on their Mars mission supply chain security. Apparently, Senator Harrison suggested we might have relevant technology. Frank raised an eyebrow. From basement archives to Mars missions in 6 months. Not bad for a maintenance worker and a CEO who were both contemplating the end of their careers. Life takes unexpected turns, Eleanor agreed, moving to stand beside him at the window. Their relationship had evolved cautiously over the past months, professional respect deepening into friendship and perhaps something more, though neither had rushed to define it. Sometimes you find your most important allies in the most unlikely places. Frank glanced down at her, his weathered face softened by a rare smile. Like hidden rooms and maintenance elevators. Exactly like that. Eleanor's hand found his, their fingers intertwining with the comfortable familiarity they had developed. Thank you, Frank. Not just for saving the company, but for showing me there's always another chapter. Outside, the Boston skyline stretched before them, the afternoon sun gilding the harbor with golden light. In the lobby below, Sarah was demonstrating some principle of encryption with animated gestures to her captivated audience of schoolchildren. The museum visitors moved through the exhibits, absorbing the authentic history of American innovation, the triumphs and failures, the famous names and the forgotten contributors. Frank squeezed Eleanor's hand gently. Thomas would be proud, you know, not just of saving the company, but of honoring the truth, the whole complicated, messy truth of how innovation really happens. I think he would, Eleanor agreed, and I think he'd be especially pleased that his final project was completed by the same brilliant mind he collaborated with all those years ago. Frank looked away, still uncomfortable with direct praise, but the slight straightening of his shoulders betrayed his pride. Phoenix is just the beginning. Sarah's already talking about applying the same principles to medical device security, financial transaction, verification voting systems. The future of Harrington's systems, Eleanor said with satisfaction. Built on respect for the past, but not constrained by it. As they stood together at the window, watching the world they had fought to preserve, Eleanor reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. From the depths of despair in a forgotten archive room to this new beginning, united by a shared commitment to building something of lasting value. The pill bottle that had once seemed her only escape was now a distant memory, replaced by purpose, connection, and the unexpected joy of mentoring Sarah's remarkable talent. Frank, too, had transformed from the invisible maintenance worker traversing midnight corridors to a respected innovator reclaiming his rightful place in the technological vanguard. Always another chapter, Frank murmured, echoing his words from that first night in the diner when he had offered hope to a stranger contemplating surrender. Eleanor nodded, her hand still warm in his. Always. Below them, Sarah looked up from her impromptu lecture, waving excitedly for them to join her. Frank and Eleanor exchanged a glance of shared understanding, then moved together toward the elevator that would take them down to the lobby, to Sarah, to the future, to the next chapter of a story that had nearly ended, but instead had found a new beginning in the most unlikely of alliances. As they stepped from the elevator into the lobby, surrounded by the authentic history of American innovation and the bright promise of its future, Eleanor felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This moment, these people, this purpose, was what her father had built Harrington Systems to achieve. Not just technological advancement for its own sake, but innovation that honored the past while creating something of lasting value for the future. In the basement archives beneath their feet, the hidden room remained preserved now, as a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything and how the darkest moments sometimes precede the most unexpected light. The old maintenance elevator still creaked. The archive door still required the same 6-digit code, and somewhere in those concrete corridors, the past and future of American innovation continued, their eternal conversation witnessed by those who understood that true legacy isn't carved in corporate boardrooms, but in the quiet dedication of builders who believe that what they create matters, not just for profit, not just for power, but for the enduring story of human ingenuity that outlasts us all.